everyone, my name is Jangir. Today we'll be discussing how the growing industry of brain computing will affect how thoughts are created in the future. I'm joined by Jinsu, Mereyli, and Amelan. Please describe yourself.
Hello, my name is Ginsu. I'm the founder of the Edinburgh Maths and Law Society and I'm vice president of MI Econ. And today I'll be kind of discussing the legal side of the matter.
Hello everyone, my name is Mereyli. I'm the representative of Neuroscience, and today I'll be discussing the interdisciplinary links between neuroscience and technology.
Hello, my name is Erlan. I'm the head of Almari Maths, and I'll be discussing the technology behind BCIs and how they might develop in the future.
And as I said, my name is Jangir. I am the executive director of MI Econ, and I will be covering how economics is affected in all of this and all of these aspects. Okay, guys. So Amelan is going to start right now, and he'll cover how BCIs work.
Yeah, so first, what are BCIs? BCIs are short for brain-computer interfaces. They're basically the computers that are planted inside the brain or outside the brain that can detect the waves produced by neurons inside the brain, interpret them, and convert them into a signal that can be then turned into an action by a machine, by a prosthetic arm, or something like that. So basically, how that works? Firstly, there are multiple types of BCIs, invasive and non-invasive. Non-invasive BCIs are BCIs that are placed outside the brain, like EEG. They're basically the most peaceful BCIs because they don't affect the brain much, but they don't offer much spatial resolution. So a signal can't be tracked from which part of the brain specifically it is produced. It doesn't offer much spatial resolution, so there aren't many useful use cases. Like, it can be used for prosthetics. The next type of BCI is the invasive BCI. Invasive BCIs are placed inside the brain. There are a lot of bad things that can happen when a computer is placed inside the brain, but the technology is being developed, so in the future, hopefully, this will be available for everyone.
Okay.
The invasive BCI, it might be attacked by the immune system of the brain. It might be implemented in the wrong way. So that's the dangers of the invasive BCI, but they're for much more spatial resolution. And this is the BCIs that we'll be talking about today, the ones that can track thoughts inside the brain.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you think BCIs will become widespread? Do you think a lot of people start using them in the future? Or do you think they'll still remain a small part?
I think they'll probably become widespread. Like personal computers at first, they have like very specific use cases. BCIs are mostly being developed for medical implementations right now, because to develop a BCI, there needs to be a justification for that. And as of right now, the main sphere where the BCIs are being developed are prosthetics, like people who have impaired vision, people who have like...
People who are paralyzed.
Yeah, people who are paralyzed. For those people that definitely need a BCI like, to function with the outside world, there's the people that are currently using BCIs and the people that are involved in testing. As of right now, Neuralink already placed 3 chips inside the brains of people for human testing. And the people used for those experiments are paralyzed patients who don't have much options.
So in your opinion, do you think the risks outweigh the benefits or do you think that's worth it?
Yeah, for those people, risks definitely outweighs the benefits. The ones who can't move, they don't have much options except implementing something like that.
Discuss ethics.
Yeah, well, like how the PCI works. I discussed the overview of the technology, but again, discuss the specifics of, like, basically, for invasive BCIs, the electrodes placed in the brain, they track the waves in the brain. The waves in the brain, they correspond to neurons talking to each other, basically. And those signals are like minuscule fluctuations in voltage, 1 millionth of a volt. So we need very precise technology to detect them. After the signals are collected, the computer has to interpret them. To do this, people use machine learning. So basically, like, on a real example, a person might think of a direction, like if we want to implement a BCI, that as an output gives the direction that the person is thinking of, left, right, up or down. So how does that work? A person thinks of a rightward direction 1,000 times, and the machine learning algorithm is giving that data. There is a bunch of junk that it has to eliminate and pick out the data that corresponds specifically to the neurons activated within the plug. And when the eye is trained, it can now detect when the person is thinking of action, rightwards, leftwards, upwards, or downwards.
So you're saying that the AI in the BCI should be trained on kind of what a person thinks or wants to do, right?
Yeah.
But wouldn't you consider that kind of invasive in the fact that it can read and understand what you want to do, perhaps even before you think of it fully?
Yes, that is quite invasive. As of right now, like the people involved, they don't mind because they don't have any other options other than BCIs. But in the future, it might raise concerns.
Could that be considered as exploitation by corporations and kind of taking advantage of vulnerable people if you don't really have other options so that they can train and operate their technology?
Yeah, to some it might be.
I can add on to that because of as Milan has mentioned, the recruitment of people to have the BCIs tested for Neuralink. They recruited people with quadriplegia, so people who have spinal cord injuries or neurodevelopmental disorders. They actually are the primary beneficiaries of those BCIs being implemented into them because the benefits for them outweigh the risks, because right now there is no certain solution for their condition, quadriplegia. So by integrating BCIs into them, they actually have a higher risk of actually surviving.
Yeah. So you think that although it may have, that certain corporations may have kind of ulterior motives, that the net effect is good and that people are benefiting from the use of this technology, right?
Primarily, yeah, because Neuralink's telepathy BCI, it aims to bypass the damaged neuron pathways of the people with spinal cord injuries, of people with quadriplegia, as mentioned as well. And it's important to look into the neuroscience behind that, on actually how the signals are actually generated for neurotransmitters to pass those electrical signals into the brain. And as mentioned by Milan, the BCIs, they can be detected using neural signals such as EEG, ECOG, and implanted electrodes. And the way it actually works is the synapses, they carry this electrical signal through neurotransmitters that diffuse from the presynaptic cleft to the postsynaptic cleft, from sensory neuron to motor neuron, from motor neuron to relay neuron, and so on. It bypasses through the CNS, and for people with such conditions, those neural pathways into the brain, to the central nervous system, they're damaged. And the way that BCIs are integrated, they bypass these damaged neural pathways by actually finding alternative pathways to reach the brain.
So that sounds like very interesting new technology, right? But is there no way to repair these neural pathways once they deteriorate? Or is there any way to kind of bypass them using technology?
Currently, it is researchers such as the researchers in MIT who have actually worked with functional MRI that is used to detect blood flow in the brain. As the brain uses up oxygen for respiration to release energy, the fMRI can be used to detect the blood pathway for the brain. And why it is used is to detect the pattern recognition of which sides, which parts of the brain are used the most, which parts of the brain are potent the most. And currently, technology such as BCI is primarily the solution for that.
So current technology kind of takes what brains are already thinking and tries to replicate it, right? After it can no longer do that through like certain conditions, right?
Exactly. That's actually how neural networks work. So neural networks, they mimic the human brain. They replicate exactly what the human brain is doing. The way they work and how you could train this model, you have lots of nodes, and these nodes are filled with data. And in 2012, deep neural networks have been introduced where you can input data such as text, such as sound and images for the model to train on. And you tell this model, this is classified as that, and this classifies as this. That's how image classification works, for example. And that mimics how we humans perceive the outside world, because we humans, we find patterns everywhere. And that's exactly what neural networks does. And another crucial thing to mention is the use of bias in neural networks. Bias can be positive or negative, which alludes to the neural network model to have a certain predictability for whether the resolution is positive or resolution is negative. And that mimics how we as humans perceive the outside world, because we don't necessarily have original ideas. We are trained on what we see in the outside world. We are trained with environmental factors that we consume in our brain. And through these nodes of information, we can then cognitively identify patterns, such as neural networks.
That's interesting. So you're saying that AI can be trained to kind of detect what we humans will do and could replicate it, right? But don't you think that could kind of lead to this negative chain effect where one person may think a specific thing, and because of that, and the AI has been trained on that, it can lead to other people thinking of thing. And it could be positive, right? But on the off chance it's negative, that could have a detrimental effect on society, right?
Definitely a huge detrimental effect.
So how do you suggest we could like control that or make sure it doesn't happen? Because who decides whether something is good or bad, right? What kind of regulations do you think we should put in place to deal with that?
Some of the regulations set in place, well, the most critical problem right now that we're facing is the usage of data. We're running out of data, and data is currently the most wealthy resource that we have to train these neural network models. If there is some way that we can either limit this use of data or actually generate new resources of data, then that could heavily impact the world right now.
So you think that if there's more data, more information available to AI, then it's able to learn about different viewpoints or like standpoints on a specific topic, right?
Yeah.
And in that case, it will become a bit more balanced, right? Okay, good answer.
Yeah, so in summary, the specific brainwaves that are detected by the BCIs, they can be interpreted as thoughts and specific actions by the machine. Like, for example, if the person had his left arm amputated, there are specific neurons responsible for the left arm in the motor cortex. And when those neurons are activated, they're desynchronized. Basically, when the left arm is at rest, or if the person thinks is at rest, the neurons are emitting the same wavelengths. Not really wavelengths, but they're in sync with the type of the signals they're producing. But then when the person thinks of a movement in the left arm, they asynchronize, creating a thought that can be interpreted as a movement of the prosthetic arm by the machine. So this way BCIs can basically track the movement of neurons and ions inside our brain to interpret them as thoughts or specific actions.
So thoughts are the movement of neurons in our brain, and that causes specific actions to be done, right?
Yeah, basically.
Thank you, Amna, for explaining the tech behind BCTs and how it works. Now, Mereyli, I understand you're very interested in neuroscience. Could you perhaps explain the kind of science behind it all?
To add on to the neuroscience behind the way the brain-computer interfaces work, as Mereyli has mentioned, there are certain frequencies or brainwaves that are used to collect these neural signals from, and some of those are alpha brainwaves, which you can detect them from when you are sleeping, when you're during your rapid eye movement stage of sleeping. or beta brainwaves when you are in your non-rapid eye movement of sleep. And how these brainwaves actually correspond to your neural signals, it's your mental state. So these specific brainwave frequencies, they correspond to the mental state of your brain, whether it's cognitively functioning now, whether it's processing lots of information, and whether it's trying to predict patterns, and so on. I mentioned before on how neural networks actually work, and to add on to the actual genesis of neural network models, you can go back to when people started playing games. So not many people know the medical advancements made through BCIs, such as having people with prosthetics being able to move again, having people communicate through those signals from the brain, be translated into thoughts that we could visually see. But there's also a huge chunk of that which is related to the entertainment industry. The GPUs, the graphical processing units of computers, they were actually integrated by NVIDIA as a movement to progress the gaming industry. Because during that time, a couple decades ago, games weren't able to run on the hardware that they had at the time because the tech wasn't evolving. But with the progressing GPU, we had a progress in AI, we had a progress in brain-computer interfaces, and so on. In terms of Neuralink, they have integrated that into their experiments by actually implanting those chips into monkeys first, because people didn't know whether it was viable enough, whether it was safe enough to be implemented into humans. But after having a trial of implementing their chips into their monkeys and they came off alive, they started using people and recruiting people to test out this as well.
Essentially, as AI and BCIs are used in the development of sectors such as the game industry, don't you think this could actually have a negative effect on the production in an economy, right? As more people stay unemployed, kind of spend more time in the games, as we better understand the brain, and we're able to kind of target those addictive centers in the brain.
So you're saying it's actually not beneficial for people as technology gets evolved because of the addictive nature of people getting into games?
I'm not saying that's not beneficial. I'm saying that's one of the kind of side effects of developing technology, right? As we are able to understand the human brain better, as BCIs have become more developed and we're able to use them more, don't you think that it could have a dangerous nature?
I would think anything that progresses, any new innovation would have some predicament to it, which has high risk. But if we were to set certain regulations in place, then we could avoid that. Which regulations do you think would benefit?
Perhaps just making sure that that game companies don't target specific sensors using the brain, and instead just try to focus on making a product that's accessible for consumers.
Adding on to the clash of innovation and ethical rights and the moral side of how brain-computer interfaces are integrated into our lives, with neuroscience being advanced every day and with new neuroprosthetics, new neuromodulation devices being created, how do you see these innovations being protected by patent laws? And what are some ethical and legal ownership problems that may arise with that?
Okay. Good question, right? So kind of patenting or kind of copyright, it's kind of broken down into three sections, right? So intellectual property law, where it's kind of designed to make sure that creators of innovations or designs can like stay safe from other people copying them, right? So there's like copyrights, trademarks, and patents, right? And they all serve different functions. But essentially, for something to be kind of protected under IP law, it has to be in tangible kind of medium, something that you can really hold, right? Because you can't really patent a certain idea, right? You can like copyright a book, you can copyright a song, you can copyright a certain melody, right? But it has to be something that's physical, right? Something that's there. And in that sense, you can't patent thoughts, but if the thoughts are written down, perhaps something like that, you could, in that sense, yeah.
What if these thoughts were to train an AI model, which then assisted a BCI into, for example, writing a book or creating a movie? Then who owns the intellectual property in that case?
The intellectual property of what the AI has created. Okay, so there are actually a few cases, right, brought up. So some authors believe that their work was used non-consensually in training of AI models, which led to the AI kind of mimicking their writing style, right? Because as we know, when AI trains on something, you'll kind of replicate it in a sense, right? So I think that it's quite difficult to kind of attribute something to AI in terms of ownership or authorship. And it's actually proven before. And Dr. Thaler created an AI system called Dabus, right? And he believed that it created two inventions. And he tried to patent them. And it was rejected by the US, the UK, on the grounds that it wasn't a natural person, right? For something to be copyrighted, trademarked, or patented, it has to come from a natural person. And that's a person who's living and has legal rights and responsibilities. So in that sense, no, currently, we can't actually be authorship or ownership to an AI system due to it not being alive, not being a person with legal rights. It's just the closest thing it comes to is being an entity, right? But it's not alive, it's not a person. So in that sense, we can't, yeah, you know.
If you apply the same logic as an information being gathered to train a neural network model, right? The ideas that it creates, they're not original. They're composed of different information, different data that they've been trained on, that they've been tested on, validated on. That's how we humans work. That's how our brains work. So if we were to use the argument that what our creation, our idea is not original because it's composed of the ideas of other people, would that kind of bring rise to new problems in legislation rights?
So you're saying like that people make decisions as a combination of many factors, right? Yeah, I guess it is, right? That a person might have an idea because of something they witnessed or something they did years ago that still affects them to this day, right? And I mean, it's difficult, but if a person can prove that their creation is new and non-obvious, so it's not public knowledge already, and it's something unique, regardless of how they got to that, if they're able to submit it to a patent office, right, then they get the right. But it's less about the way you got to it, but it's more about the end product you created, and whether it fits the requirements, whether it fits the fixation requirement, things like that. So that's what you really need for something to pass as being trademarked, copyrighted, or patented.
So what do you think of thoughts being patented in the future? I mean, I think as BCIs are being developed in the future, we might record our own thoughts.
I mean, I think it's a large problem we have currently right now. There's a large gap concerning AI and anything pretty much related to it, right? And because of that, we do need to implement some new laws, some new legislation. But I think that in the future, thoughts could be patented, right? They could have some kind of ownership over them. But I think that they would need to meet a set of requirements, such as being written down or kind of like stored somewhere in some kind of database that proves, yes, you had that thought originally. It is yours, right? And because BCIs can kind of track your brain activity, how you got there, or kind of like decisions you made in the process leading up to it, we can kind of see how it came to like fruition, right?
Jangir, could you perhaps explain to us how that would affect the economy?
So if you create a new market, so the idea of thoughts being patented means that they could be sold, and it could create a marketplace where people can sell their thoughts and not actually like project, but just barely only ideas, which creates a new sector for the economy that creates new opportunities and opens new doors. But however, that does come with a black market where people may get thoughts and ideas by avoiding the actual precautions that need to taken with it. Then uh, there's a lot of room for exploitation and inequality. So rich people benefit from a lot of these things first. For example, AI. Rich people are more likely to benefit from it first rather than poor people, which were uh, raise the inequality gap between them. And the ability to be able to buy shots means that maybe companies won't even need to hire employees, as many employees as they has, meaning they could, instead of like paying for the employees, paying for the office spaces and stuff, they can just buy thoughts online, ideas online, which
Good question.
So do you have any idea of how new emerging artificial related technology could become more accessible to lower income citizens?
yes, definitely. Over time, everything becomes more accessible to people. As me, an example, Duolingo education, it becomes more accessible over time to everyone. There are new platforms right now, for example, DeepSeek for AI, which can be used by, which is free, it can be used by anyone. Uh, so yeah, over time, everything usually gets more accessible for people with lower incomes. Uh, However, that still does mean that higher income individuals will still benefit from it more. And companies such as Meta, Google, they can create a whole lot of new opportunities for them. A whole new marketplace can be created in which people can trade their thoughts, trade their insight, and they won't actually have to file for a patent, right? It's just we can't tell for sure how it's going to be now, how it's going to be in the future, just how you said, but definitely the process of making a patent will be less uh, it'll be like less excruciating than it is now because you actually have to like sign papers and documents for it to work like that. In the future, it will all get simplified. So, yeah.
So as you said, like the big corporations developing these softwares, they will probably become more powerful, right? As information is collected more. And as Mereyli said, you know, data is the most valuable resource in the world right now. So what do you think will happen if a certain company perhaps invests a lot of money into BCIs and kind of that sector?
Yeah.
And we result in having a monopoly where a certain company has total dominance over markets.
Yeah. So right now, Neuralink is one of the most dominating firms in this space, right? So, knowing that Meta and other companies, they're trying to catch up, creating their own AI, like Vigo and DeepSeek, even China and other nations are creating, trying to keep up with everyone. So it does create for a lot of competition, but it may also create a monopoly at first, as it may be hard to manage because if it was, for example, in the UK or in the US, really like Western was, they can be managed. Monopolies are managed. They can, they're like they can get demonopolized, they can get deregulated, everything. The governments may deregulate the market for more firms to join and actually invest. And but that doesn't mean that countries such as China or anyone else will have dominant control.
I can hear. So you talked about big companies like Google, Meta, using the data.
Yeah.
So they're very known for collecting user data, not only from users that don't know about it, and using it to train AI. Do you think they will collect sorts of people in the future to train AI, like sorts of people who are using BCIs?
Yeah, the other day I was discussing something with my father, and then like an hour later, I got like a video on Instagram about that topic that I never got before that. So, this happened multiple times to me. So I'm sure there's some kind of tracking, and it's not very private. There's like, I have a sleeping app that tracks my sleep. It records all the noises I make during my sleep, and I'm sure like right now it's really hard to stay private and actually like know your rights, because a lot of it is just all social media tracks your Wi-Fi. A lot of it, they sell your data to each other, right? Because I can be discussing something in Snapchat, and then like I can get a video about the thing I was discussing in Snapchat and TikTok when I never got it before. So especially with now it being implemented with the human brain and having access to your thoughts in the future, probably means the problem. I think that privacy within each year gets diminished, and people actually can't. I don't think people understand like how bad it is now. And in here, sure, have computers having access to like your thoughts. I would rather not. I would rather not have it. Yeah.
Yeah, because like one thing is like typing something on the internet and seeing the advertisement for that thing. Yeah. The other thing is thinking of something and getting an advertisement for it.
Yeah, that's true. Like thoughts are meant to be private, right?
Yeah.
And it's very hard to know what it would be like in the future.
But if you can't use the data of other people as a driving force for innovation, how do you propose that technology keeps being improved over time?
Yeah, that is true. But
It has to be willingly.
yeah, it has to be one, like maybe apps they ask if they can track their data, right? So you can do the same thing with that, because I don't think a lot of people would be willing to have their thoughts tracked and like track them onto as their companies. There's firstly,
I mean, I think that's actually quite an interesting question, right? So you're saying that in order for innovation to occur, we need to kind of dig into people a little bit. We need to kind of overstep their boundaries so we can like progress as a human race, right?
To a certain extent.
Yeah. So do you think that we should kind of invade its privacy, kind of go over their rights a little bit just to make sure that innovation does progress? And I agree that it is an important term, right? It is an important like industry we need to develop, right? It's growing very fast, and we do need to like make sure it stays growing. But do you think that's the right way to go about this? To collect data in this kind of shifty way?
Well, then the debate arises whether morality outweighs innovation. And as I asked before, regulations can be set in place with how the personal information of people could be used. I'm really not sure whether those regulations could be used fairly with people, especially if it also creates an entirely new sector in the market, which greatly benefits the wealthier percentage of people.
But I think it's also going to be very useful for kind of non-lethal people, right?
Exactly.
Because they'll be able to kind of sell their swords, right? That's just one example of what they could do with this game technology.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, it becomes more accessible to lower income people as well.
Well, so Zhang, what do you think in terms of how economic growth can be achieved in an economy?
yeah.
Do you think that this kind of invasive nature of BCIs will help the economy? Or do you think that instead we should prioritize morals on kind of making sure we stay individuals with our own autonomy?
Definitely, it will benefit the economy. There needs to be change for improvement, right? So having the ability for people to create a whole new marketplace, sell their ideas out of nothing without having to create anything physical. The only capital being their brain and the chip gives a whole lot of new opportunities for individuals, not for the government and the country. Yeah. So with morals, I think economic growth is kind of limited, right? Because I'm gonna be honest, because like in order for economies to grow, you have to sometimes choose something more risky, something that people won't like, but in the long term, it may eat better for the whole economy in generally. So like, um, with companies like Neurotech, governments could like there can be government intervention, right, to make sure that they don't actually steal much of your information and that they actually like obey the limits that they promise their users, right? So
In case of Neuralink, if they were to promise to the government, we're not going to bypass these certain regulations, these certain laws, then how are they able to actually make and create a change for those patients that they're trying to treat?
no, it has to be limited, right? It can be like to any extent, but as long as there's a limit and they don't actually like process each and every thought of a person, right? Depending on the person, because some people may sacrifice their private life for innovation, but I think the majority of people will be against it.
So, which what are you trying to say?
I'm trying to say that uh, as long as governments intervene in and make sure that companies don't like abuse their power, and they know that the user was the chip is actually willingly giving their information. So, but as long as that happens, everything's right.
That's one of the problems, right? Where Mereyli's saying that, as you've said, right?
Yeah.
Chances are not a lot of people are going to want to give up their private information just for innovation, right? Yeah. But then how are we going to grow it, right? How is this industry going to grow without information? So that's like, how do we balance it, right? And that's kind of, you think we should just make sure like, okay, innovation can happen, but we have to make sure that people like stay people first.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah. So you prioritize kind of privacy and decision making over like innovation and growth, right?
Because then it can cause like societal issues, right? You can get people, you can get a lot of people if companies will abuse their power and actually like process each thought of a person or a user, then people will not be happy in that, right?
But then the government could also abuse their power when controlling these rules and limitations.
Right, but it truly just depends on how the government limits the companies, right? So
You say you prioritize the privatization of the market. So you prioritize the consumers. How will you be able to prioritize the needs for these consumers if you are obeying to the regulations set in place by the government, which may be detrimental to innovation and technologies made for these consumers?
So are you saying that people's private thoughts, private spaces should be taken apart and
Kind of dissect.
dissected for innovation? Because everyone should have an option, right? Because right now you're just saying that you're justifying that it's fine for companies.
No, I'm not justifying it. I'm just trying to question.
No, I think I understand what point she's making, right? Yeah. And it is an important point in the sense that how will the technology grow without being trained? AI relies on information to develop, right?
Right.
So how can AI like become more kind of human-like in these BCIs without actually like having some experience as a human, right?
Yeah.
So how will technology grow if the government keeps regulating it, right? And I think honestly, I think that BCIs are a positive step.
Yeah.
In the sense that they create a lot of opportunities for a lot of people that they can help a lot of people in their day-to-day lives. Mm-hmm. But there is the issue of privacy and autonomy, of course. So how do you suggest we handle that?
So that is a limited issue. But as I said, it's a limiting issue, right? So that people may, not all people may be for the use of like BCIs chips in their heads, right? Because a lot of people are skeptical about it. So they're going to, we're not going to take them into the picture. We're going to take people into the picture who are actually going to use BCIs. So as I said, people who are going to use BCIs,
it's actually like broad interpretation. I don't know. I'm not sure what you think about that, because human rights. This is like human rights, right? So, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can take the example of like electric cars, right? A lot of people are against them. They're kind of set in their ways. They kind of say, no, 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 we're not going to go with that. I'm just going to stick on my kind of oil car, right? But we understand that it's necessary for our environment, for our society to flourish, right? That we can switch to these cleaner alternatives. So I think that sometimes we do have to make choices that we know should benefit us. But even if they might be choices that we don't really like or want, right?
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
In terms of technological advancement, what do you think are some of the things that we can keep an eye on and expect in the next decade?
Yeah, definitely the developments in AI are gonna aid the developments in BCIs, because machine learning is used in BCIs to interpret brain data. Sooner or later, we'll be able to interpret thoughts, ideas, like a picture inside someone's brain using BCIs. So yes, that's definitely a direction we're heading to, being able to produce a product or a movie just from the thoughts of a person.
But then there's the problem, right, of the kind of damage that AI causes in itself, right? Not only is there the over-reliance of humans themselves on AI kind of doing the thinking for them, but there's also the detrimental environmental impacts that AI has, right? The amount of water it consumes, the amount of energy it requires per each search, right? So how do we make sure that AI does grow, but it doesn't have a negative effect on us that's too large for us to handle in the future?
But we definitely need to take control of how the companies are abusing the resources that are public to everyone, like the water resources. And we should be aware of the applications of like rapid development of AI. Like as you said, like government regulations, I think Jangir just mentioned that they will definitely be helpful in preventing those issues.
Like giving you a quota, right?
Yeah, like giving a quota.
So do you think that maybe AI should kind of shift from being an important tool to kind of something on the side to make sure that we don't overuse it? Or do you think we should keep trying to develop it and almost make it think for us by using BCIs?
I mean, we shouldn't halt technological advancement, but we definitely should take control of it, in my opinion, because BCIs are heading in a quite dangerous direction right now.
Yeah.
To answer Jin's remark, neuroscientist David Eagleman, he has said that the brain is like a company made of different departments, right? Different parts answer for different cognitive functions of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex. And so these different departments have to be used in their own ways. AI cannot fully take their place in how the human brain functions. And because of that, we have to prioritize the need for AI as a tool, but not as something that, as you said again, not as something that we should over-rely on.
So you think AI could almost become like a new department of the brain, right? A new kind of part of it, right?
That would be an invigorating part.
So, but don't you think that's a little bit dangerous of kind of crossing into who we are as humans and what kind of distinguishes us from machine humans? Because the problem is, right, there is the kind of black box problem with AI where we don't know why it does certain things. We don't know why it comes to certain decisions, you know? There's just a lot of complicated and kind of mysterious factors in modern AI. So if we start mixing that with us humans, then how do we make sure that we stay on track in society and we make sure that we don't make any kind of irrational decisions that normally humans would have made without AI intervention?
With AI intervention, nowadays we use, for example, ChatGPT, we use DeepSeek, we use Google Gemini. And with the case of Google, they have created a new model, Google DeepMind, which is able to replicate any data that you give into it. It's able to classify image on all platforms. Any image that you give it, it will be able to do it. It could measure certain parameters of the room, for example. And that is basically taking the role of what our brains should do. And the limitations that we should set in place would be our cognitive cognitive playfulness, I guess. Because we, in our generation, we have experienced the rise of AI. But the generations below us, they have lived through their lives so far with AI being present at all times. If they stop being intellectually playful, intellectually creative, then I guess we are doomed in the future.
Mereyli, I have a question. So, main concern I personally have with this is that we may get over-reliant on AI. So, basically, in the future with generations to come, I'm thinking like brain cells get deleted if they're not used, right? So, to save energy.
Neurogeo.
Yeah, neurons. Okay, just to clarify. So over time, if we're gonna get overly dependent on AI, we're not gonna really utilize our brains, right, as much as we did before. So may it cause a decline in intellectual ability over generations of people?
And I'd like to also add that, as you did say, human creativity is an important aspect of us. And the problem with machine learning is that it kind of meshes it all into one the mob, right? And then the problem is that if we begin to rely, as he said, on AI, chances are we're going to kind of become this one person and we're going to really lose what makes us humans. So how would you deal with over reliance on AI and making sure that we don't lose our cognitive function as a result of it?
That's an interesting question because as we have delved into that before, no one's thoughts are actually creative, not original. But we still can be creative in our own ways. And with the case of machine learning as a subset of AI is basically pattern recognition. If we use AI in a way that doesn't allow us to find certain patterns in what we do in our environment, then yes, of course, we're going to degenerate mentally. But if we were to use AI as something to actually enhance our pattern recognition, our intellectual playfulness, then we could use AI as a great benefit to us in the future.
But like, you know how AI uses probabilistic assessments, right? So kind of take the options it has and choose which one to go with, right? For instance, let's say a person is trying to walk somewhere and the AI, kind of the BCI in their head kind of says, okay, go right here, it's faster, it's the most efficient way, right? What if a person without a BCI would have chosen to go left, right? Because of their mood, right? So we've just taken away that kind of uniqueness to humans by using BCIs, by kind of choosing the most efficient way. And although it might be the best way, it's not the way that us humans would go, right?
In this example, the person with the BCI would actually integrate neuroplasticity into the decisions that they're making. So by neuroplasticity, we mean actually generating new neural pathways for the brain to make decisions that they will be making in the future as well. If the decision that they made is good for them, they will keep on making them and they'll keep on finding the patterns that they make with each cross-section that they take. Oh, should I go right or left? And with the person without the brain-computer interface, they will be more susceptible to bias, as I mentioned before. Bias could be integrated with brain-computer interfaces, as said, positive or negative. But if we were to regulate these biases in place, then we could be less susceptible to the problems that may arise with over-reliance in AI.
So you just discussed how kind of AI will use patterns, right? Pattern like learning, kind of saying, okay, he does this every day, chances are he's going to do it the next day as well, right? But I think that what makes us human is the ability to be irrational to an extent, right? So you can't really accommodate for that in a pattern. You can't say, okay, well, he's irrational, so he's probably going to be irrational today or maybe tomorrow, but you can't really guess, right? That's the whole point of being irrational. So how will we kind of make sure that humans stay human while integrating AI software, kind of BCIs?
Can I add? Have you seen RoboCop? Like, there was this dude, he died, and then he got put into the body of a robot, and he had a chip in his brain. But then, when he started to disobey his orders, they turned off his ability to think individually, fully. and the chip was doing all the work for him, and he was just like fully just a robot. So yeah, just to add.
Okay, in this case of irrationality, what the reason why humans are irrational in their nature could be due to genetic predispositions. Maybe it's in our genes, maybe it's in our blood that we or our ancestors were irrational in their decision making, and it has been passed down for generations for us. And the one limitation of AI is that it cannot be random. There's no such thing as randomness. It's impossible to replicate. And I think Amirwan, as the math expert here, could explain to us what randomness actually is and what are the probability of actually being random.
I mean, if we like going deep into that, there isn't much difference between the randomness inside our brain and determinism of artificial intelligence, if you think about it. Because our brains, the neural pathways inside our brains, they are mostly predetermined. They don't make the random decisions, they're the output to an input. And in a way, we can't really do random action, an action more random in any way than an action of an AI, in my opinion.
Because when I was writing code for a neural network model, for example, and I had to write a code to make something random, a decision random. And in code, you cannot make a set figure of integers be a random set, right? There has to be a certain pattern to make it random, making it not random, but again, relying on patterns.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, right? In the cases where AI actually does act rationally, for example, Tesla's autopilot crashing or kind of veering off road, how can we kind of explain that? Where can we put liability in those kind of cases, right? So we can't say, oh, it's fully the AI's fault, because we can't really break down why it made that choice. So how do we assign it to maybe the producers of artificial intelligence, or maybe the producers of Tesla, or maybe the person driving the car? How will we break it down in that kind of situation?
That will be predetermined by the AI that's operating the Tesla car. If certain information has been trained with the model has been tested on, if this certain information has included this data to, for example, crash or have the leakage somewhere, then that could be predetermined as well in the model.
So you think everything that an AI could ever do, it's pretty much written in its code. It's always going to be there. We're always going to be able to figure out why it's been doing something. You can almost predict what it's going to do in the future.
Yeah, that's the basis, because you feed the AI with what information you want it to have. It's not going to generate new information. It's just going to integrate the data that is trained on, being tested on, and then create data that corresponds to what you have been feeding it.
Couldn't that be dangerous though? And I know you've said it before, but in terms of bias, so if an AI is trained on specific data, how do we make sure it doesn't lean to a specific side or kind of push people into that kind of side?
That's interesting, because with bias, you either want it to be biased, you either want it to be strongly correlated to being positive or strongly correlated to being negative. And if you try to take away that bias, in a sense that makes it more biased as well. So that's very interesting. If we were to integrate certain biases that regulate the biases of the information that you train the model on, then
We can actually avoid bias.
you can't, yeah.
The only unbiased data that exists is the data produced by an AI, and that AI has to train on some data, which is likely to be biased.
The attempt to remove this bias makes it biased in itself.
So you think that bias is unavoidable, that we should just kind of go forward with this, even if AI does come out a bit wonky, does say like, oh, okay, actually, you know what, no, I think this way, so you're also going to think this way.
Yeah, as Amilan has mentioned, bias is unavoidable, but if you feed it the right data,
What makes something the right data? How do you constitute say, okay, this is right and this is wrong? And no, actually, wait, I don't like that one actually. That one's wrong now and this one's right. How do you make sure that your decision is correct?
in the case of a car, you wouldn't want your car to like crash. You wouldn't want your car to open at random times. So that's how you.
What if it's something more ethical?
Yeah, like, let's imagine an example. You're driving a Tesla on the pass inside the mountains on a huge hiking trail. You're driving around the corner, and then there is a hiker that jumps out from the corner. The Tesla now has two options: either drive into the hiker and kill him, or drive all the cliff of hiking pass and kill you. What do you think?
I mean, in this situation, it's also difficult because we can't really break down why the AI makes this a choice in that decision. It's not necessarily trained for those kind of crazy situations where 1 in a million chance the thing happens, right? And we can't say, okay, the AI chose to do this because like kind of summed up and it made this choice. No, it's like all mysterious. So that's one of the problems we have when it comes to AI and making sure like liability is distributed properly.
Yeah.
It's about probability, as you have mentioned. It's whether the probability of, for example, running into the hyper is higher than probability of crashing into somewhere and killing yourself, then that's the option that the car will go
I
with.
think the problem is that AI looks at things in numbers, right? But we humans, we're not numbers. We're a mix of
Yeah, that's
we're humans, we're thoughts, we're ethics, we're everything, right? So how could AI possibly understand what it is to be human?
In terms of VCIs, that's exactly what it does. It converts analog data to digital data. And that's how it actually computes this digital data into transforming these electrical signals from analog to digital and then process it. The way the AI can be more human-like.
Well, I think, okay.
If you replicate your brain on a computer, molecule by molecule, wouldn't that make it human? I mean, brain inside you,
You've gone through so much, right? Your brain, you've lived like what, 16, 17 years on this planet, gone through so many experiences. How could you possibly replicate all of that in one brain, do it perfectly, replicate it all? Every single emotion you felt, every single thing you thought in that moment to create like what you are now, right? It'd be pretty difficult. And in that sense, even then, AI wouldn't be able to fully grasp what you as a human are going through.
I mean, it is very difficult, but if we think about it, it's not quite as impossible as we think. Like, what does it take to replicate every neuron inside someone's brain? How many neurons are inside the brain? Around.
Not necessarily let's replicate it into biological matter, right here. But what you're like thinking about, really, like everything you've gone through, like as she said, there's no such thing as like an original thought nowadays, right? Because it's just a culmination of what you've gone through in your past. So how could you possibly replicate everything you've gone through as a human, every single interaction, like looking there, every single little bit you've ever done in your life to create a human brain?
I mean, the AI, the hardware is increasing in power exponentially. The power of AI is increasing exponentially. So in a couple of decades, we might be heading into the direction where we might be able to replicate. I mean, like,
In the sense that we could just create new people. And in that sense, the whole value of the memories, everything you've gone through, just erode it because it could just create it on the spot just like that. So what's even the point of living life as a human if a robot could just do it for you in like 3 seconds?
This is where the intersection of biology takes place, because right now scientists are trying to actually produce a biological computer. If you have heard of biological quantum computers, they actually integrate biological substances into the computer without relying fully on digitalized information on the hardware. They actually integrate biological matter into the computer so it can integrate the biological substances of what makes a human a human. And this is what we're progressing towards in the coming decades.
But then we also have to think about it in the sense of, is it morally right to do that? Like we know a lot of people just like how some companies may test on animals, things like that. But what they're doing right now, they're creating a human. It's not really human. Like this computer can think like a human, but it can't do what humans can do. And isn't that unfair? If we're gonna treat it like a human or like a man-made human, isn't it unfair that it can't walk, can't breathe, it can't express life like we do? But it has the same capacities as us, but it just can't do it.
That depends on the person. If you think that's well,
That's like a huge philosophical question.
Yeah.
But I think there are going to be a lot of those coming out. Yes, kind of develop, and we have to kind of weigh just how human AI is and whether it can truly become a human. And even if it should become a human, right? That's already a kind of interesting question there.
It's definitely the ethics of AI are going to be more and more complicated in the future. When the AI start crossing the line between machine and human, that's where it gets really complicated.
Is there a potential worry make that we're moving too fast and that our society just isn't able to contain it right now? In our hierarchy of needs, just how high up is AI in comparison to other things like world hunger or like world peace? Should we really be focusing on developing AI in comparison to other problems we have in the world?
people have been working on AI since like a long time ago. In the case of NVIDIA, they had to go through a decade of scientific research on whether their chips can be viable to the AI industry or not. And the rise of NVIDIA right now in the market, for example, is rising just now in the recent years. But they have been on the market since a long time ago because they have been working on the rise of AI since decades ago.
But if we were to focus more on AI, more on BCIs, right? The government would at some point have to kind of step in and say, okay, here are some rules, regulations.
For sure.
Are we sure we want to dedicate the government's time, energy, resources to that instead of solving other problems?
I think it's inevitable because we are humans who are progressing more than the humans that have generations ago. And because of technological advancements, we have to keep on advancing or else we just die.
And it does give an advantage, right? So if the government spends their time and energy onto progressing AI, subsidizing companies, setting up regulations, maybe for that specific government, it will help them. For example, you take the US, China, it can help them with distributing food, with distributing help, clothes, shelter for people. It can help process things that take months, weeks, maybe even years, and make the time for those things, process them way faster.
The problem of displacing those people with their jobs arises. How will you address the issue of loss of employment, for example, with AI replacing them at their jobs?
But it's true. And the only thing I think that can help people is if the government actually sets regulations. Like right now, they do. Like there's a minimum capacity for a company, like they should like have the minimum like number of employees. Like I don't know, 100 or whatever. Jobs like cashiers, cleaners, waiters, and really just depends on how the government intervenes and makes sure that people actually get supplied jobs and have the opportunity to have a job as they are willing to.
All right. I think as we kind of wrap up, I'd like to leave you with one question, and that is, are we heading towards a world where thoughts are becoming no longer private, they're no longer a thing, that are essential to humans and only to humans?
Yes, probably. Now, since the companies are probably gonna steal our thoughts in the future, we should definitely look out for it and start doing something about it already.
So do you guys think it would be beneficial if our thoughts were no longer private, or do you think it would be bad?
Definitely, as you and Mereyli argued, it's for innovation, right? But if you want to keep ethics right, we're kind of gonna stay back. But for innovation to pursue innovation, you have to kind of go over the boundaries, as you argued. So I'm pretty sure that in a couple of decades, nothing will really be that. Everything will be tracked because right now, everything what's on your phone is like I don't trust my phone. I don't trust any app. I genuinely believe that they do already track your activity. They they track what you see. They know what you see. They know what you talk about. They can track your phone calls. Nothing is truly private, and it'll only get worse with years to come.
We have to make sacrifices.
So are you guys more on the side that like, oh, okay, with my personal learning being private, it's all for innovation, it's to make sure our society keeps advancing? Or are you guys leaning more to the side of no, these are my thoughts, they should be private?
Yeah, to me personally, keeping thoughts private is where those lie. Because I think using conversations like from Reddit and other media platforms to train AI, that's for innovation and that's acceptable to move the AI progress forwards. Because most of the users have agreed to have their data used. When people go onto the internet, they know that everything is going to remain public, everything they post. But the abuse of our thoughts for training AI is where I think it becomes dangerous and unethical.
I think there's a lot of space for inequality to develop. As wealthier people, they will definitely like disagree with that. And even right now, individuals can pay Google or any web browser to not have their like information be on that site. For example, I don't know, you can try to like see their home on Google Maps, and it will be blurred. So it does create inequality. As richer individuals with higher incomes, they may have they may have immunity to it. They may just pay the firms to not be affected, not have a bad effect on them.
Yeah.
So people with lower incomes, I guess that they're just being left at a disadvantage, that they're being discriminated in some sort of way, that their information can get abused and they can't deal with it back.
I think there's also the problem where if we do kind of transition to this economy where we can sell our thoughts, we'll kind of stifle and kind of leadership in people, right? Where people will say, no, you know what, I have this good idea, but instead of pursuing it myself and trying to build it myself, I'll just sell it off to someone else. And that could result in just the richer getting richer and the poor staying poor, right?
True, that is true. Because, as I said, maybe companies will even stop employing as many people as they do. So they don't have to rent offices. They don't have to pay for whatever they have to pay for the employees. They can just buy, maybe even bulk buy stocks and benefit from
I think companies will actually try look to buy information and data.
yeah.
I think maybe, yes, they will be looking for thoughts in terms of how they can grow their businesses, etc. But I think that companies will really, really be looking for kind of how people think, looking at certain biases, looking at what will make their product more desirable for people. So I think information, as BCIs grow, will become even more valuable and more so after. And the problem is that the supply will increase as more companies start to kind of track that data.
Maybe even it'll be like economies of scale, as personal data from apps and personal data from AI can get put into one, and firms may get even more information for what they're paying. So yeah, I believe that the rich will just get richer and the poor people will definitely not benefit.
So looking at it purely from a kind of social hierarchy,
Yeah.
would you stop the production and the kind of innovation and the growth of BCIs and AI to make sure that society kind of stays more equal?
No, I wouldn't. Well, even so, if saying that I pursue wouldn't, I understand that a lot of people will be at a disadvantage from this. A lot of people, and it truly just depends on what rules your government sets. For example, Australia right now, they banned DeepSeek and like government offices, right? And truly just depends on what circumstances your country's in and what they're ready to do for you. Because like European countries probably will be very cautious about AI, but then like if you take developing countries that will value development more than quality of life with it of their citizens, then I think that it may be bad.
Yeah, so I think that this is a very kind of tricky problem where you have to be very careful how we kind of deal with it. Because on one hand, it is very good for us. It could be like amazing, right? In terms of how much easier our lives could be, how much faster we could think. But on the other hand, we have to look at problems that we could face, right? Like environmental problems, societal problems, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's something that we do need to address in the future. I think it's a growing problem. I think that lawmakers, politicians in countries worldwide do need to kind of gather to an extent and kind of figure this board out. Because if left unchecked, like global warming to an extent, right, this problem could kind of grow too large to handle, right? So does anyone have anything they'd like to say? Karen?
I'm just 1 second. I'm just sure that there will be a split in like countries that want to progress in AI technology and treat countries that will value ethics more than progression, right? So maybe that'll even create new space for countries collaborating together to stop or collaborate together to progress AI. So maybe creating new alliances, but creating conflicts too, because ethics are really sensitive topic around the world, and they may start conflicts. Conflicts, when you're right.
Okay. Sorry, you're from the right side.
Well, for me, I don't think we should cross the borders of people. If they want to share their data, for sure, to their data. If they do not want to share their data as part of the privatization of information, then we have to respect that. Because we can still advance through the coming years and still make progresses in our innovation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think everything has already been said. Like, in my opinion, we definitely need to protect our thoughts. Like, governments should protect the thoughts of the citizens by implementing regulations, because that's where I would personally draw the line between ethics, well, between using information for technological advancement, using data for technological advancement, and abusing it, and like it's being detrimental to our privacy.
Okay.
What do you think?
Please leave your thoughts down below. Leave a like and subscribe. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.